This program is designed to provide general information with regards to the subject matters covered. This information is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, sponsors, or station are engaged in rendering any specific and personal, medical, financial, legal, counseling, professional service, or any advice. You should seek the services of competent professionals before applying or trying any suggested ideas.
Good morning, true seekers and true crime junkies. This is Nanette Bartow. We are back with another episode of Hit the Road, Jack, Finding the Zodiac. Last week, we actually finished off with the Southern California murders. I wanted to back us up just a few steps just to kind of bring everybody back up to pace. Just like in the lipstick murders, when we seen a break in the crimes and the murders for approximately 6 months while Jack was at sea and gone to war, we're going to see that same thing happen. Just as we had talked about last week in the lone woman murders, we had the last woman, Jean Spangler, that went missing on October 7th of 1949. Like I say, though, she literally was cited in several different places even after the fact that she had gone missing. And even though people had indicated she might have been a victim of the lone woman murderer, I think actually that she probably was more along the lines involved with some of the things that Jack was involved with. We show some great connections to the mob, to Elizabeth Short, to many other things that are going on during this time frame. So I just wanted to make note at this point, even though she is the last person who goes missing, and I do not believe that she was a victim of the Black Dahlia murderer, I do believe that we see a complete absence of murders in the California area at this point in time, because we see that Jack is getting ready to go back into the military in approximately 3 to 4 months here. So we did cover the summary and how that actually matches up with the lipstick murders, the Texarkana Phantom murders, and as well with the lone wolf woman murders and the Black Dahlia murders. So we're going to climb back into our presentation at this point, and I'm going to catch you up with what's going on during this time frame with the government. So I like to kind of keep everything open where we're bouncing back and forth between what the government is doing, what the military is doing, what Jack is doing, and what the serial killers are doing. So at this point, we're going to go back into the Black Ops program. It's an underground experimentation with secret organizations and all the things that we're told about, but we can never prove, which is going to unfold in this presentation. So going through our history books, we should cover the happenings of those that became in power and by what means they got there so that we can vote accordingly for our officials that represent us. So we're going to hear about some things that have moved through the family of politics as well, and in the media. So in 1945, we talked about the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission is responsible for what they called Program F. F as in Frank, which is a project on fluoride. And I know that everybody has heard about fluoride being put into the water, and it's been history's greatest quandary as to whether or not the water is good for us or is it safe to drink. But we also want to let everybody know that fluoride was the key component in the atomic bomb production and has a central nervous system effect on its victims, which is why there's a question or concern about it being in our water. In 1949, we see that Operation Bluebird by Dr. James Randall Noblet becomes into play with the government. In this summary of the Bluebird, Dr. Ross describes unethical experiments conducted by psychiatrists to create amnesia, new identities, hypnotic access codes, and new memories in the minds of experimental subjects. His research is based on 15,000 pages of documents obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. Dr. Ross is a past president of the International Society for the Study of Dissociation. And this is kind of where we get into some of the Zodiac's stuff, like the constant reference to the blue meanies or the blue fuzz, or who possibly drugged him. Maybe not even the police at all when he refers to the blue fuzz. But we do know that we see that this reference of blue, blue, blue keeps coming up. And again, this time frame is consistent with Jack being in the military. I did look up the reference to time in the internal clock in regards to the Bluebird project and Langley, Virginia. What I did find was that there was a URL at https://www.wanttoknow.info/bluebird10pg. That URL will take you to the basic premise of the book of the Manchurian Candidate, which is a group of American POWs in the Korean War that is brainwashed while crossing through Manchuria to freedom. They arrive back in the U.S. amnesic for the period of brainwashing, and one of them has been programmed to be an assassin. His target is a candidate for president of the U.S. His Asian handlers control him with a hypnotically implanted trigger, a particular playing card, basically. So this is the basic premise for the book. And the multiple personality disorder is now classified by the American Psychiatric Association as dissociative identity disorder. According to my definition, the Manchurian Candidate is an experimentally creative dissociative identity disorder that meets the following 4 criteria. It was created deliberately. It's a new identity that is implanted. We do see that Jack runs around with several identities. The amnesia barriers are created, and we see that the Zodiac in some of these communications will talk about how he felt like he was compartmentalized or on the outside of his body, watching himself do something he didn't physically feel himself doing. These barriers that are created is also used in the simulated or actual operations. So we do see that there's going to be some talk in regards to the use of LSD and the use of acid and the use of hypnosis possibly in these particular crimes. The CIA created the Manchurian Candidate is a fact, and easy to understand and justify from a national security perspective. I'm not criticizing the CIA or the military because I'm not an expert on intelligence in these matters. The individual who wrote this says he's a psychiatrist specializing in dissociative disorders. So we do see that Bluebird blows the whistle on extensive political abuse of psychiatry in North America in the second half of the 20th century. Many thousands of prisoners and mental patients were subjected to unethical mind control experiments by leading psychiatrists and medical schools. Organized academic psychiatry has never acknowledged this history, which I find extremely interesting because the network of mind control doctors involved in Bluebird has done a great deal of harm to the field of psychiatry and to psychiatric patients. My goal is, or this individual who's speaking about this, their goal is to break the ugly silence. And I'm going to assume they're talking about Dr. Ross in this point. The participation of the psychiatrists and medical schools in mind control research was not a matter of a few scattered doctors pursuing questionable lines of investigation. Rather, the mind control experimentation was systematic, organized, and involved many leading psychiatrists and medical schools. We are going to hear about the MK Ultra project, which we did discover had began within the military, but had then made its way out into our major universities. And so we're not talking about the lower level of society where individuals may never come to light or may never be found out by news or media or otherwise that these projects were occurring. These were actually happening inside of well-to-do families and households if they're attending a university, especially at this time. Rather, the mind control experimentation, I've said that, the mind control experiments were interwoven with radiation experiments and research on chemical and biological weapons. So now we see some of the things that the Zodiac is going to talk about in regards to, as well, the biological weapons. They were funded by the CIA, the Army, Navy, Air Force, and by other agencies, including the Public Health Service and the Scottish Rite Foundation. I'm a little shocked in regards to who is in the know of this and who is aware of what is going on, and that they're actually producing this type of information in a medical journal after the fact. And then, of course, we always have the media picking it up and making a nice little movie out of it. So the psychiatrists, psychologists, neurosurgeons, and other contractors conducting the work were embedded in a broad network of doctors. Much of the research was published in medical journals. The climate was permissive, supportive, and approving of mind control experimentation. So keep in mind, when people laugh at things like the Manchurian Candidate, the stuff was real. We also see another project called Paperclip, which is Nazi scientists who had 150 sub-projects that they were involved with. The work of the mind control doctors did not occur in a vacuum. The importation of Nazi doctors to the U.S. through secret programs like Paperclip is part of the context. After the end of World War II, German scientists and technical experts were being held in detainment camps. The British, French, Americans, and Russians became embroiled in a highly competitive recruiting efforts to secure the services of these German specialists. Kind of reminds you of the NFL, I would think. I mean, obviously, everybody's going to bat and really wanting to get their hands on these particular individuals so that it can some way benefit further research within their own countries. The prospect of losing the industrial and scientific services of these German experts lead to the creation of Project Paperclip. So over 1,000 German scientists were secretly brought into the U.S. without State Department approval. The most famous individual brought over in this manner was Werner von Braun, the rocket scientist. Von Braun was the head of the German V2 rocket program. The NASA rockets that took Neil Armstrong to the moon were built by von Braun and his colleagues. Medical doctors also came over under Paperclip. So what we see happening in approximately 1950 to 1953 is Project Artichoke. So we're going to watch these projects be rolled over and renamed, or as they roll over from one process, say Paperclip bringing the scientists in, to now we're rolling over into Artichoke and what these scientists are going to do for us. So Artichoke, written by Sheffield Edwards. This is also an anniversary for the 3/15/1971, or should I say, AKA Manchurian Candidate, which is a novel that was written by Richard Condon in 1959. Former merchant marine who turned Hollywood writer. Interesting that the testing for the Manchurian Candidate had happened before the story is written. So, and it returns me to the media connection and the money. So here we have somebody that is collectively on the end, has information in regards to this particular program, capable of writing a book that then becomes a movie, and all of it in the end benefits media. So a CIA memo in January of 1952 says, can we get control of an individual to the point where he will do our bidding against his will and even against fundamental laws of nature, such as self-preservation? And this was printed by paperlessarchives.com. Artichoke was the CIA's cryptonym for the study and or use of special interrogation methods that have been known to include hypnosis, drugs, and total isolation. It grew out of Bluebird. So it seemed to me, or at least it appears, that every time somebody becomes privy to or aware of some type of government program that's going on, while they do their best to cover these things up, get rid of the evidence, claim that it's been shut down, all they really do is roll it over, reopen it, give it a new name, and start again until somebody figures that out. Or at least that's what my research is showing up to this point. So it grew out of Bluebird and was the forerunner to MK Ultra, which is something I believe that has been being decoded from the ciphers and the messages from the Zodiac killer, also leading into this notion that there was this program going on, or this hypnosis for hire type system, that drugs are used, hypnosis are used, assassination is completed. So Bluebird was the forerunner to MK Ultra, renamed and reorganized by 1953. So Bluebird was approved by the CIA director on April 20th of 1950. In August of 1951, the project was renamed Artichoke. Bluebird and Artichoke included a great deal of work on the creation of amnesia, hypnotic couriers, and the Manchurian Candidate. Artichoke documents prove that hypnotic couriers functioned effectively in real life. Simulations conducted by the CIA in the early 1950s. The degree to which such individuals were used in actual operations is still classified. So we're still not getting the full information on this, but we do see and we do know that it was effective, they were used, and these hypnotic couriers could be created. Which kind of really brings me to mind with Sirhan Sirhan claiming that he had been hypnotized in the process of the RFK shooting. However, he literally believed he was hypnotized and wasn't there or present cognitively in regards to what was going on. And there's this great, huge hype around whether or not he was the one that actively shot RFK, or was he just the patsy? So somebody coming in as the hypnotic courier, unaware of what he's really doing, being told to do this job, even though he wasn't going to be successful at it. They clearly knew how they were going to handle the situation, and he was really just there to either make a scene, cause people to look over here, or even to take the fall for the particular rap, just like Oswald in the JFK case. Let's see here. As a side note, I like to tell everybody, Google what's called a short history of U.S. government respect for human life. This brought me to, like I said, the 39 or so pages of experiments that our own government has indeed perpetrated against us. There are Warren reports that support all of these programs that I'm talking about. This is not something that I'm a conspiracy theorist or trying to wrap my mind around something possible that the government could be doing to us. These are legitimately researched programs that are on the internet for us to find at any time we want. So this brings us back into, as I had indicated before, Jean Spangler went missing. I don't believe she was a victim of the lone wolf or lone woman murders, but I do believe that she was part of a government CIA mob type syndicate, something where she was running or hiding from the IRS, from the law, from whatever it might be. At that point in October of 1949, we see all murders cease to exist. 4 short months later, we see that Jack is receiving his honorable discharge from the Army of the United States on February of 1950 from Hamilton Air Force Base, which he actively participated in ARSMATs in the Air Force, and we're going to discuss that here in a few minutes. But Jack has many experiences where he could have gotten involved with the wrong side of the tracks. I've seen where he is bootlegged as a teenager, which would likely have involved the mob, military via their programs, CIA based on some of the communications claims, a hitman for some syndicate, media outlet, or big business such as General Electric, contract security or defense contracting firm, IRS goon like Harriet Suchet had suggested from one of her solves, or sometimes I believe a political crisis antagonist. Look over here while we have this going on over here. I'm still trying to sort my way through this and figure out exactly who Jack was working for and why he was perpetrating these crimes for almost 60 years. But after researching these cases, there seems to be a good reason to question our government, the elite, the mob, the media, or is it all one and the same? I mean, do they really hold many baskets or sit in the same basket, should I say, as one another? I recently realized how much money in taxes these corporations and the elite are not paying, which brings me back to the IRS and the possible connection of Jack being an IRS goon. So Jack was actually supposed to be in service for 3 years. I've never really kind of understood how his military existence was capable of occurring when he would at least contract himself for a certain period of time, but I never see that his paperwork follows those years of service. So just like the papers from October of 1947, it states that he had re-entered at Fort Sam Houston, Texas, for 3 years on March of 1948. However, that means he should have not been relieved of his duty until 3 of 1951 by my estimate, but we clearly see that he's getting out before that. Jack actually discharging in Hamilton Air Force Base puts him off of Highway 37. Highway 37 from Novato, a place I'm very familiar from. It's pretty much what one would refer to as their stomping grounds. It's where it's around where I grew up and lived and traveled quite frequently. There was a section of the road that was extremely dangerous, not only because fog setting in at particular points in time, but it was a single lane road each way. And with lots of traffic, people would constantly attempt to cross over the line to get around people when it wasn't safe. And this particular area became known as Blood Alley during the late 60s, that is. And we know that the Zodiac killer declared there would be fake accidents. So there's a possibility, and I would love to check into some of the sightings or eyewitness events of some of these accidents that caused death to individuals on this freeway. Here we get into some more of Jack's military stuff. Like I said, right now we have a nice big break. We have nothing but to talk about Jack and what he has going on in the military because all of the murders have stopped at this point. I don't know whose address is the 102 East 17th Street, Austin, Texas. I tend to believe that that's Mom's address. Jack has always currently kept an address in Texas, which typically was his mother's address, while holding addresses in other locations. Presumably, Jack is married to Letha Marie Self, but I believe that this is his mother's address and not Letha's address. Ancestry.com, and the reason why I believe that is because Ancestry.com shows that Jack and Letha are actually living in the Riverside, California area during 1951 and 1952, which is right around the corner. We're literally going to be getting there soon. And Jack has a habit of showing, like I said, that Texas address no matter where he's living. He even carried an Oklahoma address, I believe, for quite some time, and he had not lived there, obviously, since the 1940s, late 1940s, at least in my records. Jack was at this point in the military. Jack is with the 4th Rescue Squadron called ARSMATS, which is an air rescue service. We'll talk a little bit about that. His date of separation was February 3rd of 1950. So this is actually his discharge paperwork where he is leaving the military. And he is leaving and separating at Hamilton Air Force Base in California. We do, again, I have circled here where we show March 29th, 1948 was his date of entry. That is not consistent with it being a 3-year term, even though this particular document even indicates that it was to be a 3-year term. He was an Air Force supply technician. And then we show that Jack was, we know that Jack was already a marksman as a hunter, but he acquired a military qualification with the M1 carbine rifle, achieving an expert level at 180 meters or 200 yards while he was in the Air Force. And we can see that this documentation purports that. Here is an actual right fingerprint of Jack Terrence. I have actually spoken to the gal who heads the fingerprint division with Napa Sheriff's Department, and I was extremely interested in possibly having this compared to what they may have on file for fingerprints. I have not heard back from her, but we can clearly see that we have plenty of ridges in this right thumbprint that we could actually compare to many of the fingerprints that are involved in this case. Should anybody want this, I do have this on hand. And yes, there's plenty of ridge detail here for us to look at, including what I refer to as the delta, which are these areas where 3 points actually converge, almost making it look like a TP or a V-shaped center of skin. And we have both of them here, which is great. And then we also have some great outlying ridge detail that we could take a look at. If somebody was interested, say San Francisco PD, the Napa Sheriff's Department, the Napa Police Department, the Los Angeles Police Department, anybody who might still be currently in possession, including some of these other cases. I do not know what type of evidence we have in things like the Oakland County child murders or the Atlanta, Georgia child murders. But if there are fingerprints that are available, we do at least have a right thumbprint. It gives us a little something. And I know that the Sonoma County Sheriff's Department is also in possession of a palm print. So if that is, as long as they've maintained it and kept it, because we've seen a lot of information and evidence in these cases go missing altogether. But we do know that there is evidence out there in Jack's case. So My scan is very clear. Even after being blown up 200%, we will be able to see the detail. The second thing that I point out here is how very nice Jack's signature is at the age of approximately 23. And the notice, I also take notice to the way he writes his name. So when I was considering these looped R's that we saw in the lipstick writing and whether or not that was something Jack was doing at that particular point in time. And then, of course, in 1950, we find, on the exit. So this would have been, I would believe, being separated out in 1950. So about 4 years after the lipstick murders, but still within a relatively similar time frame. We see these looped R's that Jack is using in his signature. So as he connects his R's, he's really doing kind of a printed R, and the way he connects in is into the stem on the backside of the R, creating that exact same loop that we were looking at in the Zodiac or in the lipstick killing case. And the W is also very artistic as well. I did not see him in later life using this version of the W, but that brings me back to the W that is actually used in the lipstick killer case. And we see it again in the Tim Miller case. And like I said, it was more of a print script type W that is used in something like newspapers or magazines, or again, that relation to media. So Jack is listed as a 4th Rescue Squadron of RSMATs. This alone ties him into the NASA connection, which we see some NASA connections in regards to the Zodiac case. And of course, the Tim Miller's 2005 letter and the Apollo stamps that were used by the Zodiac. And it gives the technical knowledge to pull off the Cooper case in 1971. And the reason why I say this is because RSMAT's Air Rescue Service, which means they are literally sometimes jumping out of planes and helicopters in attempts to save and bring people to rescue. We do show that Jack's size at this particular point in time is he's 5'11" and he's 190 pounds. So he's a bit bigger than I actually thought he was going to be, because I thought he was kind of skinny, but it looks like he has definitely put on some weight. So shortly after these sightings where we're seeing this bigger the witnesses are claiming a bigger person, we see that Jack is definitely of size. Now, Jack's enlistment ends here with a discharge in Hamilton Air Force Base, California, with an unknown arrival time to California. So I have no idea when he got to California or why it was that he actually stepped out here, since he entered from Texas and purportedly was living in Texas based on this information, even at the time that he's discharging. So I don't really know where Jack is at this point. He just seems to be able to roam as freely as he wants to and ends up wherever he'd like to. Jack was a corporal supply clerk, so he handled supplies in a warehouse, and then as a sergeant in the Air Force and supply technician, handling computers, electronics, and avionics equipment for performance on an airplane, which clearly gives him access to the wing walkers, the wing walker boots we're going to see in the Zodiac case, which was related to those that had to walk on the wings of airplanes. They probably had a particular grip on the sole of that shoe so that they didn't slip off easily. And this was something that was found at one of the scene of the crimes in the Zodiac cases. Just some brief stuff on the RSMATs. I did bring a lot of it up, but it is the Air Rescue Service Military Air Transport Service. Some of the things that I highlighted here to be able to share with you was that the Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Service, ARS, was actually the renaming of the Air Rescue Service on January 1st of 1966, when MATS was redesignated as the Military Airlift Command, or MAC. As ARS, it retained the same subcommand status with MAC. The Air Rescue Service was initially established in 1946 under the Air Transport Command, just prior to the U.S. Air Force's designation as a separate service in 1947, and it continued to serve the U.S. Air Force proudly as both ARS and ARS during the Korean War and Vietnam War, as well as during the Cold War. We're about to see Jack enter the Korean War. That's why I put this up here. So even though he has experience with the RSMATs previous to the Korean War, because I think we don't see that start until June of 1950, but he has clearly backed out of the military service. February of 1950 is his discharge. So So the rescue's worth was proven time and time again. 996 combat saves in Korea and 2,780 in Southeast Asia. We also see that the origins of this, while it began in World War II, we see that it has developed or moved itself. In March of 1946, the Air Rescue Service was established under the Air Transport Command to provide rescue coverage for the continental United States. By 1949, ours aircraft covered all the world's transport routes. We did see that, yes, it was used in the Korean War, which ran from June of 1950 to July of 1953. During the Korean War, the increased use of helicopters on rescue missions became a dominant factor in saving lives. Now, we do see that this actually works its way into the NASA relation, which it shows on January of 1966, concurrent with the redesignation of the Military Air Transport Service, or MATS, as the Military Airlift Command, MAC. The Air Rescue Service was redesignated as the Aerospace Rescue and Recovery Service, ARRS, to reflect its additional role of the worldwide rescue and recovery support for manned U.S. space flights conducted by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. So now we see another merging of another area of air support. And so ours, MATS, was also responsible, I'm assuming, for any type of recovery or saving of people involved with NASA. Now, Jack's discharge paper shows his mailing address again is 102 East 17th Street, Austin, Texas, as of February 3rd, 1950, when he is discharged from California. And we show that from February of 1950 to July of 1950, Jack is in Texas working for a steel company. It doesn't indicate where he's working for on his medical paperwork, but we do see that U.S. Steel is the company that is listed in Stephen Dewhurst's book in regards to the steel company that he worked for. And it shows that he was a warehouseman. He received, checked, and sold manufactured steel in the warehouse of a large steel company. He filled orders and requisitions of tradesmen to purchase steel for use in construction work, rigged steel sheets and bars on crane, and directed crane tender in place, load in appropriate storage, and onto trucks for delivery. Now, I wanted to do some research on U.S. Steel, see who they are, because as it was indicated by the FBI, the symbol that is found on the Halloween card is a symbol that is found on sheet metal or steel beams. I don't know if they indicated that it was specifically a symbol that was used by U.S. Steel, but I would love to be able to go back and see if I couldn't find some information on that. I've done some pretty decent amount of research on it and haven't found anything yet, but you're not going to be surprised about who's involved with U.S. Steel. So I show that J.P. Morgan formed U.S. Steel on March 2nd of 1901 by financing the merger of Andrew Carnegie's Carnegie Steel Company with Albert H. Gary's Federal Steel Company and William Henry Judge Moore's National Steel Company for $492 million at that time. That would be the equivalent of $15.31 billion today. So we see J.P. Morgan Chase as one of those bankers, and clearly they were involved and had their hands into many different things, including steel. At one time, U.S. Steel was the largest steel producer at the largest corporation in the world. It was the world's first billion-dollar corporation. The company established its headquarters in the Empire Building at 71 Broadway in New York City, and it remained a major tenant in that building for 75 years. Introducing Charles M. Schwab, another individual involved with our retirements in banking. So again, I'm not shocked, but it seems as though the elite and the rich really truly do own pretty much all of the biggest business that there is out there. So Charles M. Schwab, the Carnegie Steel executive who originally suggested the merger to Morgan, ultimately emerged as the new corporation's first president. Go figure. Some of the more interesting parts about it is that they also then bought Tennessee Coal, Iron, and Railroad Company, which was headquartered in Birmingham, Alabama. Tennessee Coal was replaced in the Dow Jones Industrial Average by the General Electric Company. Again, no surprise here. So General Electric Company, again, having its hands in just about everything. The federal government attempted to use federal antitrust laws to break up U.S. Steel in 1911. The same year Standard Oil was broken up. I'm shocked to hear that they were able to break up any type of monopoly in these times. But Standard Oil is another company we're going to be talking about that I believe Jack has affiliation with. And it's interesting to note that these individuals were being looked at by the government as being basically a monopoly, or really just owning just about everything there is all under one name. But that effort, should I say, ultimately failed to tear that company down. In 1902, its first full year of operation, U.S. Steel made 67% of all the steel produced in the United States. About 100 years later, as of 2001, it produced only 8% more than it did in 1902, and its shipments accounted for only about 8% of domestic consumption. So we do see that, according, and some of the dirt on this company, which I also found interesting, according to the author Douglas Blackman in Slavery by Another Name, the growth of U.S. Steel and its subsidiaries in the South was partly dependent on the labor of cheaply paid black workers and exploited convicts. The company could obtain black labor at a fraction of the cost of white labor by taking advantage of the black codes and discriminatory laws passed in the late 19th and early 20th centuries by the Southern states after the Reconstruction era. In addition, U.S. Steel had agreements with more than 20 counties in Alabama to obtain the labor of its prisoners, often paying locals $9 a month for workers who would be forced into their mines through a system of convict leasing. The practice continued until at least the late 1920s. While some of the individuals were guilty of a crime, they did not receive payment or recognition for their work. Many died from abuse, malnutrition, and dire working and living conditions. This absolutely disgusts me. I mean, if we talk about the child labor in China and how that is a violation of those individuals' rights and how they're being taken advantage of for such small amounts of pay, this has been going on for years. This is not something that is just figured out as of recently. I mean, it looks as though these corporations and these businesses have been looking for the cheapest way to obtain anything so that the maximum profit can be put into their pockets and the stockholders' pockets. The corporation, as it was known on Wall Street, was distinguished by its size rather than for its efficiency or creativity during its heyday. In 1901, it controlled 2/3 of the steel production, and through its Pittsburgh Steamship Company, which I think kind of rolls back into what Jack was talking about doing, the Boilermakers Union and the shipyard, developed the largest commercial fleet on the Great Lakes, bringing us back to Michigan. Because of the heavy debts taken on at the company's formation, Carnegie insisted on being paid in gold bonds for his stake. and his fears of antitrust litigation, U.S. Steel moved cautiously. A little more information I won't really quite go over, but there were some things that I thought were interesting because we see that the Zodiac literally writes a letter in regards to John F. Kennedy. He is consistently using the Harry Truman stamps on most of his communications. So I wanted to bring up that the federal government intervened, obviously, to try to control U.S. Steel. President Harry S. Truman attempted to take over its steel mills in 1952 to resolve a crisis with its union and the United States Steelworkers of America. The Supreme Court blocked the takeover by ruling that the president did not have the constitutional authority to seize the mills. And then we see that President John F. Kennedy was more successful in 1962 when he pressured the steel industry into a reversing price increases that Kennedy considered dangerously inflationary. So U.S. Steel strongly resisted Kennedy's administration efforts to enlist Alabama businesses to support the desegregation of the University of Alabama. Again, so we have the U.S. Steel Company that is the all-white company using black, lowly paid workers, and then actually fighting the efforts of desegregation in Alabama. which is the race baiting government George Wallace had promised to block by standing in the schoolhouse door. Gonna block the entrance of Black people into this school. Although the firm employed more than 30,000 workers in Birmingham, Alabama, company president Roger M. Blue in 1963 went out of his way to announce that any attempt to use his company position in Birmingham to pressure local whites was repugnant to me personally and repugnant to my fellow officers at U.S. Steel. Yay, U.S. Steel. Anyways, let me move on. Fabrication of Chicago Picasso sculpture. So now we have a tie back to Chicago with U.S. Steel. Not only did they fabricate the Picasso sculpture, they also gave or donated the steel for the construction of St. Michael's Catholic Church in Chicago, since 90% of the parishioners worked at its mills. So if 90% of Chicago is working at the mills for U.S. Steel, this may likely be where Jack came into contact with the steel company. And these are the pictures that we saw back at the Northern Company of, the public, the Northern Public Company of Illinois, which was the power plant where we saw the actual boiler stacks. We saw Jack taking pictures of the workers, the steel work that was going on. So this may very well be where Jack came into contact with U.S. Steel, and he may have been primarily over in Chicago during this time, back and forth at least, that we see. So U.S. Steel also sponsored the United States Steel Hour television program from 1945 until 1963 on CBS, connection directly to the media. U.S. Steel built both the Disney's Contemporary Resort and the Disney's Polynesian Resort. And in 1971, Walt Disney World, in part to showcase its residential steel building modular projects to high-end and luxury customers. So now we see a tie back to even Disney, and we've been talking about time and the White Rabbit and going down the hole and the relation to Alice in Wonderland. So it was this particular amount of information, who it ties back to, who's involved, from Chicago to GE, to mention of issues with John F. Kennedy and Harry Truman and the Disney relation. I mean, everything seems to kind of fit there. And it also says that U.S. Steel was involved with Florida real estate development, including building beachfront condominiums during the 1970s, such as Sand Key near Daytona Beach, Florida, and the Pasadena Yacht and Country Club near St. Petersburg, Florida. So they also obviously have a tie back to Florida, but if they're 2/3 of the steel business, I'm pretty sure they're going to tie back to just about every place. Now, that brings us to the next time that Jack jumps in. So Jack must have returned from Austin, Texas at some time between July of 1950, where he reported working for the steel company, but previous to reenlisting into the reserves on January of 1951. So somewhere in that 5-month period, he went from, and again, maybe he never actually was even living in Texas. He was just keeping that address and consistently making it back there to take care of his mom. But either way, at some point between July of 1950 and January of 51, we find him back in Richmond, California, where he's rejoining the reserves, the Air Force Reserves, on January 10th of 1951. And at this point in time, when he's re-enlisting in the reserves, he's now showing, and he's doing it for 3 years once again, but we're going to show how that 3 years doesn't seem to fit with everything we know. He's using an address of 6049 Park Avenue, Richmond, California. So somewhere between working at U.S. Steel in 5 months, he's now moved all the way back out to California again. I mean, Jack is just everywhere. Now, I'm not really sure about this particular address unless he is living separately from Letha, because we are also showing that Jack and Letha are listed with an address of 218 Cunningham Street, Highland, California, during 1951 per Ancestry.com. So then we must have had another quick move here. And on 3/2 of 1951, Jack goes active in the Air Force. So basically his reserve status due to the Korean War has entered into an active status on March 2nd to 51. And Jack is sent to Japan during the Korean War as a supply sergeant. This is where he supposedly met his only true love, Iko. Jack was suddenly ripped from Iko and sent home approximately a year later. So at some point in 1952, Jack claimed to have been married underneath Japanese law, which tells us that he doesn't have a lot of morals and ethics when it comes to the commitment he made to Letha back here in the United States and already being married. Per Stephen Dewhurst's book, Jack is sent to Japan as part of the occupation forces. He purportedly shacked up with a Japanese woman, again named Iko, who Jack referred to as the only woman he ever loved, which then that kind of takes me back to the woman he lost in the bootlegging accident to the police chase. I don't know. Either way, again, he's professing love for this individual. This may be where Jack found a love of amphetamines as well, because it was widely used during the war to help the forces stay awake. It was also legal at that time and could be reached over the counter. Amphetamines were available over the counter until it became a controlled substance in 1968. So Jack began to cook his own at that point in time, and he could drive long distances without rest, stay up all night during his adult life. And this would account for the constant travel necessary to commit to some of these crimes and be gone the next day. Some of the things that are going on with the mob at this point in time is that in 1952, Lansky even offered the then president, Carlos Prios Sacaras, a bribe of US $250,000 to step down so Batista could return to power. Once Batista retook control of the government in a military coup in March of 1952, he quickly put gambling back on track. The dictator contacted Lansky and offered him an annual salary of $25,000 to serve as an unofficial gambling minister. By 1955, Batista had changed the gambling laws once again, granting a gambling license to anyone who invested $1 million in a hotel or US $200,000 into a new nightclub. Unlike the procedure for requiring gaming licenses in Vegas, this provision exempted venture capitalists from background checks. As long as they made the required investment, they were provided with public matching funds for construction, a 10-year tax exemption, and a duty-free importation of equipment and furnishings. So this is why I said everybody in the mob, everybody in that had money to spend, loved being in Cuba. So I think at the point in time, and I'm not sure when this happens, but we will find out that we are completely kicked out of Cuba. We no longer do business with Cuba. And what I have known for most of my life is that Cuban cigars had always been illegal. Why I never really knew, but now it's starting to be apparent how all of this came into play with these casinos and gambling establishments, the mob and the elite coming over to Cuba and taking advantage of what they had to offer so that they didn't have to report things, they didn't have to pay taxes, and they could clearly launder their money through this. I won't go much more into this one. It looks like it's just more information. You're welcome to stop and read it anytime you want. That brings us to our next program for the government, which was in 1953 in New York and San Francisco. It was called Operation Sea Spray. A lot of things that people don't understand is that there is actually a law on the books that states that the government can, for the few, for the many, it can perpetrate some experiments on the United States public in a manner of, again, the cost of a few to save the many. This particular Operation Sea Spray, which it was S. Marcescens, which is a hospital acquired infection or something that actually assists. It's a hymen pathogen, it says, and I'm not going to try to get into all of the medical jargon. We just know that this was released by bursting balloons of it over urban areas on the 26th and 27th of September in 1950. The U.S. Navy conducted this particular experiment named Operation Sea Spray, and the S. Marcescens was released. That the simulant bacteria caused these infections and deaths has never been conclusively established, but we do see that even though they claim the bacteria was harmless, beginning on September 29th, 11 patients at a local hospital developed a very rare, serious urinary tract infections, and one of these individuals, Edward J. Nevin, died. So cases of pneumonia in San Francisco also increased after the S. Marcescens was released. And we do see that there was a lawsuit they brought against the government between 81 and 83. The bacterium was also combined with phenol and an anthrax simulant. So we are going to be getting into the anthrax and how that fits into everything. And it was sprayed across the South, Dorset, by U.S. and U.K. military scientists as part of the DICE trials, which that is an acronym, DICE, which ran from 71 to 75. And since 1950, the S. marcescens has steadily increased as a cause of human infection, with many strains resistant to multiple antibiotics. So is this where we end up with, what is it, the next level infections we're seeing at hospitals, where people are more scared to walk into the hospital to receive treatment and fear that they're going to walk out with some type of antibiotic resistant type infection? Who knows? Either way, since this particular trial, we are starting to see that this is true, that these things are becoming more and more resistant to antibiotics. Next week, we will get into and start to talk about some of Harriet Suchet's references to, or not references, but experiences with these type of things. Her father and her coworker and her dog. Maybe I can even have her on next week as a guest. We'll see. But that would allow us to get back into some more tests that were being done, as her father was a member of the Merchant Marine as well, and did a lot of cleanup for a lot of these biological warfare type programs. I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word. Anyways, well, that is about all we have for this week. I thought I would have gotten a little bit farther, or maybe into the next murder, but we're going to actually be coming up on that here shortly. And I wish everybody a great weekend. Enjoy yourselves, and we'll see you next Friday.